If you're still running free screens or discovery visits, you're likely bleeding a lot more money than you realize. And so I know this may sound a little bit controversial because, of course, all the big gurus in the space try to tell you do a discovery visit, a free screen, or a taster session, even whatever you want to call it. You're just giving away your producer's time to effectively be inefficient. And so after being in over 400 clicks around the nation, we've seen that realistically, there's a better way to do this. So I'll kind of walk you through like the main reasons why this potentially doesn't actually make sense to be doing and how you can actually go about transitioning to where you no longer have to depend on giving away free as the default option. So that way you can just make more money, help more people, and be more efficient with your time. And so, of course, the first problem that kind of comes up is realistically, when we start to do these, salespeople or just humans in general, what do we all do? We default to the path of least resistance. So you've got like path one, which is like uphill. This is, I've got to talk to someone. I got to try to sell a $250 visit or like a $6,000 deductible or a $60 copay, something that takes a little bit of effort for someone to do. And so we have to then like actually have a sales process. We actually have to figure out how to get them from like level 1 to level 3, which is like paying the participation of personal or identity level, create some level of urgency. But instead, we could just kind of go downhill, which is like, let's not actually ask some of those harder questions. Let's not actually have a proven process that we train our team on. And instead, let's just like come in and try it out. Like, it won't hurt. Like that way we don't have to have as big of a value to price discrepancy. And so in theory, it makes sense. We have more at bats, but what ends up happening is your team takes someone who very easily could have paid full price and not had to worry about it, not had to litter up your schedule with a 15 to 30 minute session. And they will then actually just default to that because it's easier. And there's only one thing worse than someone telling you no because you're too expensive. It's someone saying yes when you actually could have charged them more. And that's what's happening a lot with all these things. Like you're just leaving pure profit on the table because we weren't willing to actually have this conversation. And maybe something that served you when you were smaller, you were thinking this was the better way. As you scale, you realize it doesn't make sense. And so the other thing that you end up kind of happening is you end up actually not realizing the inefficiencies that are outside of this visit as well. And so there's like 15 to 30 minute screens is typically what people do. And so most of our clients, they do 40 or 60-minute sessions. If you're doing 45s, there's another video on our YouTube that you probably go watch while you're losing money there. But 40 or 60 is typically what most of our people are doing. And so what ends up happening is you have these 15 or 30-minute sessions, and then there's a gap before it or a gap after it, or sometimes both. So you end up a lot of times having a full hour gap that you couldn't really fit someone in because you didn't want to have to double book people and stuff like that. And so we go from like, oh, it's only a 15-minute session. I'm not losing a ton of money during that time to an entire hour that is worth $0 revenue per visit. And as you'd imagine, 0 plus whatever your revenue per visit is drags it down really, really quick. So we'll see this a lot of times when, whether it's someone who does these pretty heavily on the insurance side or the cash side, like the cash guys will be like, hey, we're $200 a visit, but then you go look at their average revenue per visit, it's like a 130. And it's because their packages aren't structured right. And they have all these free visits being baked in to be able to have enough time to try to sell someone because they don't have a good enough front office sales process. And so this will end up causing a lot of issues. And so it's kind of like that. I don't know if you've ever heard that story where there's like the big glass jar, there's sand, there's pebbles, and there's big rocks. And we have to make sure we prioritize these right to be as efficient as we possibly can. And so a lot of times we're putting all this sand in, which is our smaller kind of unit time blocks, put all the sand in, but you've filled up like half this jar now. And so we try to then put the pebbles, which is maybe like your visits, and then your evals is going to be the bigger rocks. Well, now there's no room for your actual evals. And so if we put the big rocks first, then the pebbles, and the sand can kind of filter in. So that's not to say like, oh, well, Joe, you just told me not to do that. It's like, well, there's also specific times where, historically you've never been able to fill, or you can do it at the end of the day. So you're like, there's no way I actually could have done that. So what some of our guys will do, if we have to do free screens, which again, I don't like them. If you have to do them, I'll walk you through when you should probably do these if you have to. But you can kind of block these at different times that maybe make more sense than the way traditionally people do it. The other aspect is now we have extra layers of friction because we are working with humans. And so we think we're essentially removing friction, but we're actually adding friction. And so what ends up happening is we have someone who now has the chance to no show a discovery visit, which there's not really as much like incentive for them to show. They will then come and then maybe convert to an eval or schedule, maybe show up for the eval. And so now there's essentially different drop off points that we now have to look at potential leakage across this whole process. And so you end up losing a lot by just not having the opportunity to even sell someone from eval into plan of care because they don't even make it. And it ends up putting a ton of extra pressure on your providers to have to do all these extra sessions on top of everything. So that's the other way a lot of our guys will do it before we kind of fix some of this is they'll be like, oh yeah, just throw the discovery visit on top of their schedule. Like they'll figure it out. And then it ends up being their actual existing client gets less time. And the person who's discovery visit actually doesn't get a good experience because they're trying to squeeze it in and it just doesn't work. And so most people don't realize that the reason this model actually started to come about is because whoever was teaching this, I don't know who started this, but whoever was teaching this said, oh, well, in the high ticket industry or other industries, traditionally, this made sense. You needed to have multiple step process for someone to do it. You do it free. Let's take orthodontics. This is an easy one. I was in the dental field before. And so I'm very familiar with this model. And so most of the time you can come in, you can get a screen, see, hey, should I get braces? And so it makes sense. Yeah, $6,000, $7,000. It's like we give it away because it's already so commoditized. No one knows the difference between one orthodontist versus the other. Sound familiar? The issue is the rest of the business model is not familiar. And so we try to model them because they're like, well, if they do it, we should likely do this. But the issue is they do not work off a billable time and they do not care if they have to double, triple, quadruple book because the way their actual model works, the actual front office, the assistant, their techs, all those people will come in and they'll be the ones actually getting the x-rays, doing the prep, getting the photos, getting the actual health history, like everything that happens. And then the doctor looks at it for about 5 minutes and says like, yep, whatever the assistant said on the treatment plan is exactly what I would have done. And bye. The other thing we don't factor in is that 5 minutes, they still have assistants seeing their patients. They don't lose revenue when they do that. And so we're trying to take things from other, which is good. We want to borrow things from industries when it makes sense. But if we're only borrowing and only understanding part of the context, we don't realize why it's becoming inefficient in our model. Now, the other issue you run into, because again, if you're doing orthodontics, their whole goal is to like start you same day. Well, we can't do that for most of our actual payers. So most of your federal payers, like your Medicare, Medicaid, stuff like that, you cannot actually solicit the services from a beneficiary of any of your federal plans to try to get the services there. So like giving away free, AKA free screening, you aren't able to then upsell that same day into an eval. If you are not compliant and you are going to end up getting in trouble. And I would highly suggest that you don't do it. And so like a discovery visit itself literally should be like, hey, I lost liability insurance. I can't touch this person. I can't do assessment. I can't do really anything, but like ask them some questions, a little bit of subjective, make sure that it's actually a good fit, and then schedule them for an eval on a different day and or refer out. Like that's what a discovery visit actually is. And most people are actually blending that into being realistically an actual full blown assessment and some of those type things. And so we're actually not even compliant as well. So we're adding lack of compliance into the picture as well. And so I've literally had someone who dropped this and their conversion rate did go down, but it's not as much as people think. And so like we literally had someone go down from discovery visits. They've been doing this for 5 years based on the coach that they had before. And they were doing them pretty much across everybody. And they switched over to effectively doing nothing but straight to eval, which I'm going to kind of walk you through the phases of how we did this. And their conversion rate of lead to plan of care went down by only 1%. But to put it in perspective, they were kind of growing every year, but not like crazy. And then that next year, after really making these changes and a couple other changes that we looked at, they grew by 60.8%. And this isn't like a small person who like, it's like one therapist. And like, if you grow by 60.8%, it's like you added half a therapist. Like it's actually like they were a decent size. So this is like actual, like good foundation grew by 60.8%. And of course, this isn't the only thing, but it is a monster gap in what they had because of the inefficiency of throughput of lead to an actual plan of care. And so that's just one of the many that we've just actually seen do this, because pretty much that's one of the big processes across. There's a certain person in the industry that always pushes these discovery visits, and we end up having to, over time, get the things in place, which I'm about to walk you through, of like, how do we actually go about removing these? But before we can do that, we really have to like just break the belief that like these people have to have this in-person time with the physical therapist. Only I or only the physical therapist can be the one doing the selling. And we have to realize that the front office has to be able to actually do a little bit more sales. Like if the physical therapist is the one that has to do this forever, you're forever going to have issues growing. And so we need to be able to scale front office. We need to be able to educate them. Do they need to know every bit of anatomy? No, they do not. And so they will be able to do these calls, and you'll be shocked because you'll be like, well, I'm better at these. And it's like, well, yeah. And maybe the small percentage of time that you're allocating, you are better when you are doing it. But even if they are at 80%, they are 100% there all the time to make it to where it's more streamlined. They have more reps of volume. It's their main job. They'll be able to actually have more throughput than you trying to be perfect during the 5% availability that you have. And so the very first step is like, we really have to assess, like, do we have the right front office in place? And so, I mean, sometimes that is the hard actual like realization. Like if you started thinking like, okay, could my person actually truly sell these across the board to a paid eval? And if your answer is like, well, I mean, I think like Susan's good, but like, I mean, she tries hard, and you start justifying with these like terms of like, she tries hard, she means well, like any of that type stuff. That's a justification for you already knowing they're probably not the right fit. And so now you just have to ask, is that person trainable? Do they know what good looks like? Have we held them to the right standards? And if so, then we probably need to free up their future and get a better person. And so the next part is going to be like, do we actually have a consistent intake process so we can actually hold them to that bar? And so like, do we have, when someone comes in, this is how we actually do the intro. This is how we do the discovery. This is how we take them through the levels of recovery. This is how we actually transition into urgency. This is how we talk about payment. Like, do we have a process in place? If not, we probably need to start there, because you may be like, oh, I'm able to do it every time. It's like, well, yeah, because you're the only one that knows how to do that in your head. So it's not actually reproducible. And if we want to go to multiple locations, it can't just be, oh, this one person who crushes it is the one that knows how to do it, because the moment they quit or get fired or whatever, because as we know, front office has more churn than pretty much any other position, you're going to have to replace it and or have more than one person that can do it. So we have to have a repeatable process. And then we actually have to start holding them accountable. Like, do we actually have front office scorecards? Do we know that they're making the calls? Do we know when they make those calls that they actually get them scheduled? Those who scheduled, how many of them show? Like, do we have throughput metrics of all of that type stuff? Do we have call recording on? So that way we can actually listen to those calls. So that way we can give them feedback when someone maybe has an objection that they want to use their insurance, or that they need to talk to their spouse, or whatever the inherent objection is. Do we have an ability to do role play? So like with our clients, we do 2 days a week where we actually have role play with front office staff. And so we actually do the call review for our team, because most PTs don't have that background and or they just don't have that time. And so we actually do role play so we can actually hold them accountable and get them better. And then the last thing we have to do is, realistically, I mean, as much as we like to say it doesn't matter, we need to start actually backing into what we call payer mix marketing. And so like, if we're getting way more objections, well, a lot of times that's because we're actually attracting the wrong person. So either we're attracting the wrong person, the wrong clientele, or just the wrong actual insurance. So like, maybe we're getting a ton of UHCs that maybe don't have as much good coverage, and maybe we want more Blue Cross Blue Shield. So can we actually just download a past patient list of all of our Blue Cross Blue Shield and start doing reactivations of those patients with the higher payers that have less actual issues ever wanting to pay their stuff? And so we can kind of start to bring those, and you kind of actually build up a little bit more of the reps of this person, because if we can start with past patients going straight into eval, they'll at least feel more comfortable with that process versus offering discovery visits again. So then when a new person off the street comes in, they already have those reps, that confidence, that feedback, and they'll be able to really transition much easier. And I know some of you are going to be like, I don't want to go with my discovery visits still, Joey. So general rule of thumb, the way we look at pricing and the way we look at discovery visits, or even like for our cash guys, like how do we use pricing as our friction point? And so, because that's really what we've seen. We've literally seen across the board, whether you're at $29 all the way to $199, the conversion rate is actually the same across the board. But what ends up changing is your cost per lead ends up going up because there's just more friction for the type of person who's willing to just drop $199 if they don't know you versus $29. So the same can be applied for insurance. Someone with a really good insurance versus maybe not having as much. And so we can use this to our advantage. And so when we have a lower clinical efficiency, so AKA if we're below about a 75% clinic efficiency, then okay, maybe we'll consider a discovery visit. I'll tell you most of the time you shouldn't need it, to be clear. But you can use those as parameters. If you're between 75 and 85%, then if you're like a hybrid clinic, then maybe you just do like a $50 off. If you're above 85% clinic efficiency or 86% clinic efficiency, then realistically, we should be going straight to an eval, because what's happening is, let's say you have a $115 revenue per visit average, you're giving that away for free. So now we can't get that 115 in, because while you technically have more room available by like 14, 15% when you're above 85%, you may not have the actual open availability for the time that works for that person. So maybe 2 o'clock on a Thursday is actually what that person wanted. They end up actually not going in, and then you end up having more issues. That's the other thing that maybe y'all aren't thinking about. Like we put these discovery visits in, they come in, they have time to actually start to maybe recover. By the time we even get the eval in, they've gone from a 7 out of 10 pain to a 4 out of 10 pain. And they're thinking, hey, maybe it's actually not as bad as it is. It's going to get better on its own. So again, we have to tighten as much as we possibly can here. And so this is just like one of those, like, I mean, very, like, there's hundreds of levers that we look at from like a revenue per visit standpoint. But a lot of times these are things that we just kind of assume like, hey, that's just how we've always done it, and never actually put in a process. And so a lot of times we need to either get better marketing and sales process to get people that are actually okay and bought into why they need to come to us, or we just need to look at other aspects of, hey, what are some other inefficiencies that we have in our business from a revenue per visit standpoint? And so that's why we actually, on March 26th, we have a full revenue per visit workshop. So it's going to be like a 2-hour deep dive on all things revenue per visit. This is normally a actual client facing only workshop, but we decided, hey, I mean, what would happen if we just opened it up to the public? And so we're going to do a 2-hour deep dive, everything you could possibly need to know on increasing revenue per visit, which is the beauty of increasing revenue per visit is it's a 100% profit play. It's just keep seeing the same patients, make more profit. And so it doesn't seem like much, but when we're talking like EBITDA and multiples and stuff like that, this could be millions different on when you go to sell your practice. And so this is something where we're going to do a 2-hour deep dive. We're going to do a 1-hour Q&A. And this is going to be like super nitty gritty, like bring your pen and paper, super tactical. This isn't going to be like a Tony Robbins, rah, rah, rah. We're going to sell you at the end. It's literally just like the extent of a sales process in this thing is like, hey, this is what we do. If you'd like to join, cool. Like there's the pitch. Otherwise, like come in, get value. Like it's got a money back guarantee. So if you don't actually feel like it was valuable by the time you're done, just please like ask us for a refund. Like there's no world where you'll actually come and think it wasn't valuable. And so in the description below, just click the link, go ahead and sign up for your spot, because we are going to limit it because we want to be able to make sure that everybody can have time to ask their questions. And so just go ahead and hop on, save your spot, and I'll see you on the next one.